In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you the KPMG interview process step by step. So if you're preparing for a job interview with KPMG, or you're just curious what the KPMG interview process is like, then this video is for you. All right, let's get started. If you're watching this video, you likely already know that KPMG is one of the 4 largest professional services firms in the world, and that landing a job at KPMG not only can change your career, but also change your life. My first experience with KPMG actually happened before I decided to apply to consulting, or even before I even knew what KPMG was. So this happened the summer before my final year of university, and I was on an exchange program in Taiwan, and one of the program sponsors was KPMG. So as part of our exchange experience, we actually got to spend half a day at the KPMG office in Taipei, which is located at one of the top floors in the Taipei 101 building, which, by the way, is the tallest building in Taiwan, and at the time was the 5th largest. And as part of the program, we got to spend half the day with the KPMG employees in the Taipei office. So we got to meet everyone from the managing directors all the way down to recent associates who just joined. And during this experience, I got to know more about the KPMG culture as well as what KPMG was. And I'll tell you, part of it definitely was a sales pitch for trying to join KPMG, and in particular the KPMG Taiwan office. But given that I didn't speak Chinese, that was definitely not where I was going to apply. But that experience did tell me that I should look into KPMG, because what impressed me was that even as I was meeting the recent grads who were coming into KPMG, I just couldn't notice how confident, how poised they were. And they were using English, which was oftentimes their second language, and yet they were communicating so clearly. And I thought to myself, if less than a year they were able to be this way at KPMG, what could I do if I was working at KPMG? And as I started doing more research, I realized there were so many benefits to working at KPMG. And the more I learned about KPMG, the more reasons I found to apply to KPMG. And likely some of these are some of the reasons you're probably attracted to KPMG too. The first was the opportunity to work on so many different projects and different clients. If you know KPMG, you likely also know firms like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, also known as the big 3 of consulting. What I didn't know at the time that I know now is that KPMG actually has more revenue than all 3 of those firms combined. That means that KPMG serves more clients, and as a result, their client roster is quite diverse. So as a KPMG consultant, you actually have an opportunity to work on a diverse range of clients and projects. The second was, I was just impressed with the pay. No matter what city I was looking to apply to, whether it's New York City, Toronto, London, Singapore, I just noticed that KPMG paid in the top 5% of salaries, no matter where you're applying. So I thought to myself, I'm going to be a 21-year-old graduating from university with no business experience, and yet they're paying me in the top 5% of the world. That's a pretty big win. But beyond just the money, a lot of companies say that they put a lot of work into making work-life balance work, but KPMG actually sticks by it. So not only do they say it, but you can actually see a lot of the information publicly, which is what I found as well. And what was impressive to me is KPMG's just emphasis on work-life balance and making sure they retain their employees as long as they can. And I've seen this in 2 ways. The first is, I always think about KPMG, even though they're the smallest of the big 4, especially on the work-life balance front, they tried a lot harder when it came to just the engagements in the info sessions, as well as just the marketing they did for why you should apply to KPMG. That to me was quite impressive. And the second thing was, I actually got to see it in person. So when I became a consultant, I would often have dinners with friends of mine who were from other consulting firms like Deloitte, EY, PwC, McKinsey, Bain. And what I noticed was the people who were the least likely to come late or to cancel dinner plans last minute were those who worked at KPMG. Again, it's just my sample size on that one, but it just felt like all that data points showed me that KPMG actually cares about the people who work there. The other benefit was just the brand recognition. So KPMG has over 650 offices across 147 countries. So I knew that being employed by KPMG and having that on my resume meant that the rest of my life I would have this safety net. No matter what I decided to do, if I started a company and it didn't work out, I can always apply for a job saying that, hey, I worked at KPMG before. And having that brand recognition was just important to me on top of all the other reasons I mentioned already. And the fifth benefit I noticed was just the exit opportunities that were both inside and outside of the business world. So the more I started looking at what KPMG alums did afterwards, I noticed that they became CEOs of major companies. They ended up becoming government officials. They even became New York Times bestselling authors. There was a lot of reasons why KPMG would be a great place to work. But before you can get these benefits, you have to actually get the job. And let's talk about what that process is like for you to want to apply to KPMG, to actually land that job at KPMG. When it comes to applying to KPMG and getting a job, luckily, it's a pretty simple process. It's just difficult, but simple. At KPMG, there's 3 standard stages that occur during the recruitment process. The first phase is the online application. The second is the online assessment. And the final part is the interviews. So let's talk about each of these 3 phases. The first one is applying online. This shows KPMG that, hey, I want to work here. And there's 2 paths that you can take. If you're a student, you submit your resume as well as your academic transcript. You do this in one of 2 places. Either first, you do it online through the KPMG portal, or two, if you have a career center that has a particular relationship with KPMG, you apply to your career center. Second is if you're an experienced hire, that is, you're no longer in school, you have work experience, then you apply online through KPMG and you upload your resume. Very similar. And after your application is received and read, you might be invited back to take an online assessment. So these online assessments are a way for KPMG to gauge your potential to be a great employee at KPMG when it comes to your skills as well as your culture fit. So a couple things that they look for example, is your mental capabilities, your problem-solving skills, and your work personalities. The tests that you take actually will vary depending on the position and the location you're applying to, but there are some common ones that you might encounter. So again, you might encounter a subset of these, you might encounter all of these, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that there were online assessments. And I'm actually gonna cover 3 of the most common ones. I actually have a video that covers all of these in more detail. So I'll actually just include that in the description so you can go in more detail. So if you have an online assessment, just click below and I'll link to the online assessment one. But at a very high level, there are 3 types of assessments that you will likely encounter. The first are game-based behavioral assessments, which are you're going to play a series of games, and each game is going to assess your cognitive abilities as well as how you make decisions. The second are aptitude tests. These tests assess how well you work with numbers, how you interpret text, and how good your logical thinking skills are. The final assessment you might encounter are scenario-based tests, where you're going to be given a scenario, it could be a workplace scenario, for example, and you're going to be asked how you would think through the different scenarios and what decision you would make based on the information that you're given. The scenario-based tests are designed to test how well your working styles will mesh along with others at KPMG. Like I mentioned before, I actually have a video that goes into deep detail into each of these assessments, so I'll link that below. So when you have the assessment, you can go straight there. Assuming that your online assessment goes well, you'll be invited back to the formal interview process. The formal interview process for KPMG differs depending on the region you're applying to. So for example, in certain countries and certain cities, you'll only have a series of one-on-one interviews, while others, you might have some one-on-one interviews, but also you're gonna have panel interviews, presentations, and group interviews as well. So the best way for you to know what your lineup of what you can expect for the interviews are 2 things. First, you can check the KPMG website for the position that you're applying to in the city you're applying to. And the second is to talk to the recruiter who's in charge of the hiring process for your role. I actually recommend just talking to the recruiter because honestly, the KPMG website, given that they have so many different offices, the KPMG website is oftentimes outdated. So for example, they might say that you have a certain interview process with one-on-ones and groups, but really you just have one presentation or one group interview. But to give you a head start, I actually want to share with you the most common types of interviews that you'll encounter at KPMG, which are 3 types of key interviews: behavioral interviews, case interviews, and panel group interviews. Let's talk about each of them. Behavioral interviews, as it sounds, is all about assessing your behavior and how well you fit into the culture. So behavioral interviews and fit interviews at KPMG happen for 2 reasons. The first reason is that interviewers want to assess how well you fit into the culture. Did you do research? Why are you applying to KPMG? Why management consulting within KPMG? Why this particular team in KPMG? And the behavioral ones are all about assessing your past behavior to see how well you would fit in with the working style at KPMG. Common questions here, for example, include, tell me about a time you had to deal with a conflict with another team member. Tell me about a time that you had a disagreement with your manager. How did you resolve that? Tell me about a time when you had conflicting priorities. How did you resolve that? They want to know what your working style is and how you make decisions. And the behavioral and fit interviews will come in each of the rounds, but you can expect a lot of them in the first rounds, which will typically last about 30 to 45 minutes. And during this time, depending on where your interviewer wants to focus, you can expect about 5 to 10 questions dealing with the behavioral side of it. So just a heads up, that's what you can expect from the behavioral. The best thing that you can do is to make sure that you research about KPMG and why you're applying to that particular team. For example, one candidate that I helped land his job at KPMG came from a nursing background and actually ended up joining the health, aging, and services team under KPMG Consulting. And he was asked a lot of questions about his background in health, how he made certain decisions, and why he chose to apply for this particular team, on top of the usual questions, why KPMG, why management consulting. So definitely come prepared for the behavioral interviews and know exactly why you're applying, as well as have stories prepared for each of the scenarios that KPMG is looking for. So again, they want to make sure that you're going to be a good fit. So talk about times that you're working on a team where you have to make tough decisions and how you communicate with others on the team. The second type of interviews you're going to encounter at KPMG are what are known as case interviews. KPMG case interviews last typically about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. Again, it could go longer depending on who your interview is and the role that you're applying to. The KPMG interviews are what are called candidate-led. I have another video that describes what candidate-led is, but if you already know that term, you're good. If you don't know that term, you can watch it after this video, and I'll link to that in the description. And depending on the role that you're applying to, it could be a structured problem, like for example, you're drawing out a structure to solve a particular business problem, or it might be a little more ambiguous depending on the role that you're applying to. But essentially a case interview is you're being given a business scenario and asked how you would think through it. So for example, let's say that a KPMG interviewer might ask you, great, so these 2 companies are thinking about merging. What would you consider to see if these 2 companies should merge or not? And if you're new to case interviews, I'll also link in the description to resources to help you get up to speed on the case interviews. But I just wanted to provide a high level that you're going to be encountering case interviews. The third type of interview that you can encounter at KPMG are also known as panel or group interviews. So these are conducted in groups, and as they sound, it's similar to the interview process that I talked about earlier, except you're doing it in group. This is because KPMG wants to see how you interact with more than just one person. For example, you might be given a packet of information and then asked to create a presentation in a certain amount of time frame. So for example, you might be given 1 hour to create a presentation to give to a panel of interviewers. KPMG will call this the panel interview, the group interview, or the presentation interview, or they might use an internal term like the launchpad interview, where you'll be given 20 minutes to analyze the information given and then 30 minutes to discuss it together with the group. So again, I highly recommend when you do get a confirmation that you have an interview, make sure that you reach out to the interviewers to confirm what type of interviews you have. So I'll provide and link to other resources below depending on what type of interview you have. For example, if you have a presentation interview versus you have a one-on-one case interview. Luckily, KPMG is really on top of this, is you'll get a response back and you'll get 1 of 3 responses usually within a week. Outcome number 1 is that unfortunately it's a no and KPMG is not going to give you an offer. Outcome number 2 is that KPMG is not quite sure if they should hire you or not. So they might want to do 2 things. They might either 1, interview a couple more candidates before deciding, or 2, they might want to bring you back for additional interviews to get more data points on you. Outcome number 3 is the best outcome, which is that you pass the interview and either you're going to be invited back for future rounds of interviews or they extend you a contract and ask you to join the KPMG team. So that's pretty much the process. So now that you know how the KPMG interview process works, I want to leave you with one strategy. And this strategy is going to exponentially help you get closer to your KPMG offer. When you're applying to KPMG, research KPMG's cultures and values before your interviews. And then what I want you to do is for each of these values, go back and assess your own history, your own internships, your own work histories, your own studies, and figure out how can you demonstrate that you have these traits in you. And this strategy is going to set you apart from everyone who just relies on memorized answers or they don't customize the values to KPMG because they think that all firms are the same. Don't make this mistake because regardless of the team that you apply to, KPMG has a hiring rubric when it comes to who to hire, and they look for these exact 5 things. First is integrity. Do you make decisions based on good values? Second is excellence. Do you aim just to do enough or do you aim to be great? Third is courage. Do you take action even when it's hard? Fourth is together. Do you work well with others? Finally is the value of for better. Do you take actions that create positive outcomes? As you prepare for your KPMG interviews, especially your online assessments and behavioral interviews, I want to make sure that you have these values in mind because this is going to help you stand out from everyone else who forgets to take this simple couple minutes to think about what does KPMG actually care about and how do I tell them that I have the values to align with what they're looking for. And before you continue on your path to working at KPMG, I have 2 more things to help you. The first thing is that if you're recruiting for KPMG, if you put the word KPMG in the comments below, I'm going to share with you additional resources to help you along the way. Again, all you have to do is type in KPMG in the comment section below, and that'll tell me to send you some additional resources. And the second thing is that if you're 100% serious about wanting to work at a firm like KPMG or another amazing consulting firm, I'd love to help you get there. My team and I are former consulting recruiters and interviewers who help applicants land interviews, ace interviews, and ultimately land offers at top management consulting firms. To date, we've helped almost 90% of the people we've worked with land offers. That is nearly 9 out of 10 applicants who work with us land at least 1 consulting offer. To find out how we can help you, click the link below and you could book a free call with my team to find out more. Booking this call is free and could put you 1 step closer to landing your offer at a top management consulting firm. But you don't have to take my word for it. Actually hear from ASAP, who landed his dream job at KPMG coming from a nursing background. I'll link to his video somewhere above my head. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.